My narcissistic mother hits on all of my boyfriends because she thinks I don't deserve to have a handsome man. My name is Sophia, and I need to tell you something that's been eating at me for years. This isn't a story about forgiveness or family reconciliation. It's the raw account of how my own mother became my worst enemy, and how I learned that some wounds cut too deep to ever heal. Everything started when I turned 15. The awkward preteen phase was finally behind me. The braces were gone, the baby weight had melted away, and suddenly I had curves where there used to be sharp angles. For the first time in my life, boys at school started looking at me differently. It felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. My mother had always been the beauty of our family. At 38, she still commanded attention wherever we went. She had this way of owning every room. The perfect smile, the confident stride, the ability to make every man feel like he was the only person worth talking to. I used to feel proud having such a stunning mother. But something shifted that summer when I started getting my own share of male attention. It began with small, cutting remarks. "You still have such a childish face," she'd say, while we stood side by side in front of the bathroom mirror. "You really don't carry yourself like a woman yet." Initially, I thought she was trying to help me mature, offering the kind of guidance mothers are supposed to give. Then I noticed how she started dressing when we went out together. Before, she'd wear appropriate clothes for a mother, nice but suitable for her role. Suddenly, she was squeezing into outfits that belonged on someone decades younger. The necklines plunged lower, the skirts got tighter, the heels grew higher. When we'd walk into restaurants or stores together, I could feel the confusion in people's eyes as they tried to figure out where to look first. The turning point came at my friend Kate's pool party. I had finally worked up the courage to wear a bikini, feeling attractive for the first time in my life. My mother insisted on coming to supervise, which was strange because she'd never shown interest in chaperoning before. She arrived wearing a tiny string bikini that would have been inappropriate on a college student, let alone a mother at a high school gathering. I watched in horror as she positioned herself directly in the center of where all the teenage boys were hanging out. She laughed too loudly at their awkward jokes, asked them detailed questions about their sports teams, and kept adjusting her bikini top in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. The boys didn't know how to react. They were 15 and 16, and here was this grown woman essentially performing for them. "Your mom is interesting," one of the guys said to me later, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and discomfort. I felt my cheeks burn with shame. That night, when we got home, I tried to address what had happened. "Mom, don't you think that bikini was a little inappropriate for a high school party?" She turned to me with a cold smile I'd never seen before. "Honey, just because you're starting to get a little attention doesn't mean you're the only one who deserves to feel beautiful. I'm still young, and I'm not ready to become invisible just because my daughter is growing up." The way she said "my daughter," like it was some kind of burden or threat, made my stomach drop. That's when I realized this wasn't about protecting me or guiding me. This was about something much darker. The sabotage started subtly during my junior year of high school. Every time there was a school dance or party where boys would be present, suddenly we had urgent family obligations. Homecoming? Your grandmother is visiting that weekend, and it would be disrespectful not to spend time with her. Winter formal? Your cousin's wedding is the same day and family comes first. Spring dance? I already booked us a mother-daughter spa weekend for bonding. I believed her every single time because she was my mother. Why would she lie? But the phone calls were the cruelest part. In those days before cell phones were common, the house phone was how boys contacted me. I'd come home from school excited, asking if anyone had called, and she'd shake her head with feigned sympathy. "No calls today, sweetheart." It wasn't until my senior year that I discovered the truth. I was studying at my friend Sarah's house when her younger brother burst in. "Sophia, that guy from your chemistry class called here looking for you. He said he's been trying to reach you for weeks, but your mom keeps telling him you're sick or busy or not interested." My blood turned to ice. What guy from chemistry class? The tall one with the dark hair. He seemed really disappointed. Said he wanted to ask you to prom but figured you weren't interested since you never returned his calls. Everything clicked into place. All those times I'd heard her voice get sweet and flirtatious on the phone before she'd hang up quickly. All those wrong numbers and telemarketers. She'd been intercepting calls from boys who wanted to ask me out, systematically destroying my chances at teenage romance. When I confronted her that evening, she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "I was protecting you," she said, not looking up from her magazine. "Those boys only want one thing, and you're too young and naive to see it. I was saving you from getting hurt." "That's not your decision to make," I shouted. "As long as you live under my roof, everything about your life is my decision to make." But it wasn't just the intercepted calls. Looking back, I realized she controlled every aspect of how I presented myself to the world. Any outfit that showed my developing figure would mysteriously develop problems. She'd point out how the jeans made my hips look too wide, how the sweater was trying too hard, how the dress made me look like I was asking for trouble. I'd end up wearing baggy clothes that completely hid my body. Meanwhile, she'd emerge from her bedroom in outfits that belonged in nightclubs, not at parent-teacher conferences or grocery stores. The cruelest part was how she'd build me up just to tear me down. "You look so pretty, honey," she'd say while doing my makeup. Then, right before we'd leave the house, "Actually, let me fix this. You look a bit too made up for someone your age." She'd wipe half of it off, leaving me looking washed out and plain while she looked ready for a magazine photo shoot. I started feeling invisible in my own life. At school events where she'd volunteer, teachers and parents would compliment her constantly. "You look too young to have a teenager," they'd gush. She'd beam and put her arm around me possessively. "Sophia keeps me feeling young," she'd say. But the message was crystal clear. She was still the star, and I was just the supporting cast in her performance. The most disturbing part wasn't even what she was doing to me. It was watching how grown men in our community responded to her advances. Married fathers at school events would linger too long in conversations with her. The grocery store manager would mysteriously appear whenever we shopped. Even my friends' fathers would get that look in their eyes when she was around. And she basked in every second of it. My first real boyfriend was Derek. I met him during my senior year when I finally got brave enough to join the drama club. He was a college freshman, just 19, with kind eyes and a way of making me feel like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to be someone's first choice. Derek was patient with my inexperience and respectful in a way that made me understand what people meant when they talked about good guys. We'd spend hours discussing books, movies, our dreams for the future. He wanted to become a teacher, and I was planning to study psychology. We felt so mature, so ready for real love. I managed to keep him away from my house for 3 months. I'd make excuses about why we couldn't hang out there, suggesting coffee shops and movie theaters instead. Something deep in my gut warned me to keep him separated from my mother, though I couldn't explain why. But eventually, he started asking questions. "Why haven't I met your parents yet? Are you embarrassed by me?" I wasn't embarrassed by him. I was terrified of what my mother would do to him. But I was 17 and in love, and I didn't know how to explain my fears without sounding paranoid. The first time Derek came to dinner, my mother outdid herself. She emerged from her bedroom wearing a black dress that was completely inappropriate for a family meal. It hugged every curve and had a neckline that plunged dangerously low. She'd spent 2 hours on her hair and makeup, looking like she was heading to a red carpet event, not meeting her daughter's teenage boyfriend. "You must be Derek," she purred, extending her hand like she expected him to kiss it. "I've heard so much about you." I watched Derek's face change as he took her in. His eyes widened slightly, and he seemed to forget I was standing right there. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. "Oh, call me Linda," she interrupted, still holding his hand longer than necessary. "Mrs. makes me feel so old, and I'm nowhere near ready for that." Throughout dinner, she dominated every conversation. When Derek mentioned his education major, she leaned forward and touched his arm. "A teacher. How noble." I've always believed educators are the most important people in society. When he talked about his favorite books, suddenly she'd read them all too. When he mentioned loving basketball, she just happened to be a huge fan of his favorite team. I sat there watching the boy I loved fall under her spell, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "Your mother is incredible," he told me as we walked to his car that night. "She's so youthful and interesting. You're lucky to have such a cool mom." The word cool hit me like a physical blow. That's not what mothers were supposed to be to their daughters' boyfriends. Over the next few weeks, Derek started finding excuses to come by the house even when I wasn't there. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see if you were home," he'd say. But I'd discover later that my mother had been texting him from my phone, inviting him over while I was at my part-time job. The end came when I found the messages on our shared family computer. I was looking for a school document when I saw Derek's name in the recent chat history. My heart stopped as I clicked on the conversation thread. The messages made me physically sick. My mother was sending him photos. Not nude, but highly suggestive poses in her workout clothes, her bikini from the previous summer, tight dresses with strategic cleavage shots. She was complaining about feeling trapped in a life that makes me feel older than I am, and how she sometimes forgets I have responsibilities because I feel more like a 25-year-old than a mother. Derek was eating it up. "You don't look like anyone's mother," he'd written back. "You look like you could be Sophia's older sister." The final message thread was from the night before. Sophia's working late tomorrow. Come by around 8 and we can talk without interruption. I printed everything out with trembling hands and waited. When Derek arrived that evening, I was sitting in the living room with the printed conversation spread across the coffee table. He walked in expecting to find my mother and instead found me holding evidence of their betrayal. Sophia, I can explain. Explain what? How you're cheating on me with my own mother? How you're both liars. My mother appeared in the doorway, wearing yet another inappropriate outfit. When she saw the papers in my hands, she didn't look ashamed or apologetic. She looked annoyed that she'd been caught. Honey, you're being dramatic, she said calmly. Derek and I are just friends. He needs someone mature to talk to. Friends don't send each other photos like this, I said, holding up one of her suggestive selfies. Derek couldn't meet my eyes. Sophia, your mom understands me in ways that… Get out, I screamed. Get out of my house. After he left, I turned to face the woman who had given birth to me, but had just proven she was never really my mother. How could you do this to me? She shrugged, as if breaking my heart was just a minor inconvenience in her day. Love doesn't choose age, and it doesn't choose family. If Derek prefers my company to yours, that says more about you than it does about me. That night I cried until I had no tears left. But somewhere in that devastation, something harder and sharper was being born inside me. The naive daughter who had spent years making excuses for her mother's behavior died that night, and someone much more dangerous took her place. After Derek, I stopped crying and started watching. For the first time, I began to really see my mother for what she was. A predator who had spent years systematically destroying my confidence and sabotaging my relationships. Every protective decision, every helpful suggestion, every time she'd made me feel small, it had all been calculated to keep me under her thumb while she maintained her position as the most desirable woman in our house. I started documenting everything. The way she'd accidentally bump into my male teachers at school events, wearing outfits that belonged on someone half her age. How she'd linger inappropriately long talking to teenage boys who worked at local stores, asking unnecessary questions about their schedules and interests. The way she'd position herself in our front yard whenever the neighbor's college-age son was outside, suddenly needing to water plants or check the mail. It was disgusting, and I was done pretending not to see it. The first time I struck back was at my cousin Rachel's graduation party. My mother showed up wearing a tight white sundress that made her look like she was trying to compete with the 18-year-old graduates. She immediately gravitated toward the group of young men, laughing too loudly and touching their arms whenever she spoke. I walked over and slipped my arm around her waist with a big smile. Mom, Mrs. Peterson was just asking about your back problems. She wanted to know if that specialist helped with your chronic pain issues. Her face froze. There were no back problems, but suddenly she was no longer the vibrant young-looking woman flirting with college boys. She was a middle-aged lady with health issues. I don't have back problems, she said through gritted teeth. Oh, sorry, I said innocently. I must have been thinking of your other chronic condition. You know, the one that makes you so tired all the time? The boys had already lost interest and wandered away. My mother's eyes flashed with pure rage, but she couldn't call me out without admitting what I was really doing. That night, she confronted me. What was that performance about at the party? I was just trying to help you connect with Mrs. Peterson, I said sweetly. She's closer to your age group. I thought you might have more in common with her than with those kids. Those kids are practically adults. You're right, I said. They're practically adults, and you're practically 50. There's a huge difference. Her hand twitched like she wanted to slap me, but she didn't dare. We both knew the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. From that point on, every time she tried to seduce someone inappropriate, I was there with a perfectly innocent comment designed to remind everyone of her actual age and role. When she flirted with my friend's older brother at a barbecue, I mentioned how tired she looked and suggested she might want to go home early to rest. When she wore a crop top to parent-teacher night, I loudly asked if she wanted me to bring her a sweater since she looked cold. The psychological warfare escalated quickly. She'd make cutting remarks about my appearance, so I'd respond with concern for her memory problems or her vision, since she seemed to be seeing things that weren't there. She'd criticize my clothes, so I'd express worry about her midlife crisis and suggest she might want to talk to a therapist about her difficulty accepting the aging process. You're being cruel, she said after I'd interrupted her flirting with a waiter by asking if she'd remembered to take her vitamins that morning. I'm being helpful, I replied, just like you've always been helpful to me. The satisfaction I felt when I saw her face fall when she realized her own daughter was now her biggest threat was intoxicating. For years, she'd held all the power in our relationship. She'd controlled my social life, my self-esteem, and my romantic relationships with surgical precision. Now I had learned to use her own weapons against her, and I was devastatingly good at it. But I was about to learn that my mother's capacity for destruction went far deeper than I had ever imagined. She was about to prove that she would rather burn our entire relationship to the ground than lose her position as the most desired woman in any room. By my freshman year of college, I had perfected the art of humiliating my mother in public. Every family gathering became a battlefield, and I came armed with precision strikes designed to shatter her carefully crafted image. The dinner party at Aunt Susan's house was my masterpiece. I'd invited Jason, a guy from my English literature class, knowing my mother would see him as fresh prey. Sure enough, she emerged from the bathroom having touched up her makeup, which meant she'd applied enough for a nightclub and changed into a dress that barely covered her thighs. She made her grand entrance into the dining room, expecting all eyes to turn to her as they always did. Jason looked up politely, smiled, and went back to his conversation with my cousin about baseball statistics. My mother was not used to being ignored. She positioned herself directly across from Jason and leaned forward every time she spoke, making sure he got a full view of her cleavage. She asked him about his major, his hobbies, his family, using that breathy voice she reserved for male attention. That's when I struck. "Mom," I said loudly enough for the entire table to hear, "did you forget to put on the rest of your dress? Or are you confusing family dinner with a strip club?" The silence that followed was deafening. My uncle choked on his wine, my aunt's eyes went wide, and my cousins looked between us with undisguised fascination. But best of all was watching my mother's face turn bright red, the first time I'd ever seen her genuinely embarrassed. "Sophia," she hissed. "What? I'm just concerned. You seem confused about appropriate attire lately. Maybe we should make you an appointment with Dr. Martinez to check if everything's okay upstairs." I tapped my temple with exaggerated concern. Jason looked completely bewildered by the exchange, which was perfect. He was seeing her through my eyes now, not as a mysterious, alluring woman, but as a pathetic, middle-aged person having some kind of breakdown. My mother excused herself from the table and didn't come back until dessert, by which time she'd changed into a conservative blouse and pants. When she returned, I smiled sweetly and said, "Much better, Mom. That outfit is so much more age-appropriate." The pattern continued every time she tried to seduce one of my friends or potential boyfriends. She'd dress inappropriately. I'd comment publicly on her obvious desperation. She'd flirt with someone decades younger. I'd loudly express concern about her vision or mental state. She'd try to position herself as the cool young mom. I'd remind everyone present of her actual age and role. "You're getting too old to keep dressing like you're in college," I told her after she showed up to my study group in a crop top and miniskirt. "Don't speak to me like that," she snapped. "Someone has to. You're embarrassing yourself, and frankly, you're embarrassing me. These are my classmates, not your dating pool." The other students shifted uncomfortably, suddenly seeing her performance for what it really was. She left within 10 minutes, claiming she had other things to do. My personal favorite was the day she tried to crash my friend Katie's pool party. Again. She showed up uninvited in a bikini that was somehow even smaller than the one she'd worn to my high school party years earlier. "Sophia didn't mention you were coming," Katie said politely. "Oh, I just wanted to make sure the girls were being safe," my mother purred, already eyeing the college guys who were there. "That's so sweet of you to be worried about our safety," I said innocently. "Especially since you've been having those balance issues lately. Maybe you should sit in the shade instead of being near the pool. We wouldn't want you to have another dizzy spell and fall in." "I don't have balance issues," she said through clenched teeth. "Really? Because last week you said you felt lightheaded when you stood up too fast. I'm just worried about you, Mom. Maybe it's time to accept that your body isn't what it used to be." By this point, the college guys were looking at her like she was someone's embarrassing aunt rather than a potential conquest. She left before the party even really got started. That night, she cornered me in my bedroom. "What has happened to you?" she demanded. "You used to be such a sweet girl." "I grew up," I replied. "I learned to recognize manipulation and pathetic behavior when I see it. You're being cruel and vindictive. I'm being honest. For the first time in my life, I'm telling the truth about what I see instead of protecting your feelings. If you don't like what you're hearing, maybe you should examine your behavior instead of blaming me for pointing it out." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact second she realized I was no longer under her control. The sweet, insecure daughter she'd spent years molding was gone, replaced by someone who could play her games better than she could. "You have no idea what you're starting," she said quietly. "Neither do you," I replied. "I thought I'd won our war. I had no idea she was just getting started." I met Marcus during my junior year of college at a coffee shop near campus. I was struggling with an economics assignment when this man in an expensive suit sat down at the table next to mine and pulled out the exact textbook I was using. Macroeconomics? He asked, noticing my frustrated expression. I remember that class. Professor Harrison's midterm nearly destroyed me. He was older, probably around 30, with this quiet confidence that made him seem completely different from the boys I'd been dating. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. And when he listened to me explain what I was struggling with, he gave me his complete attention. I'm Marcus, he said, extending his hand like a proper adult. And you are definitely too intelligent to be letting Harrison's problem sets defeat you. That afternoon turned into 3 hours of the best conversation I'd ever had with a man. Marcus was a financial advisor who'd graduated from our university 8 years earlier. He was intelligent, funny, and treated me like an equal instead of some young girl he was trying to impress. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was with someone who saw the real me, not just my looks or my youth, but my thoughts, my ambitions, my personality. When he asked me out to dinner that weekend, I said yes without a moment's hesitation. Those first 6 months with Marcus were the happiest I'd ever been. He took me to real restaurants, not just pizza places and movie theaters. We talked about politics, literature, our goals for the future. He encouraged my interest in psychology, and never once made me feel stupid or inexperienced. Marcus was successful enough that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He drove a nice car, lived in a beautiful apartment downtown, and wore clothes that actually fit properly. But what I loved most was how he treated me. Like a woman worth knowing, not just a conquest. You're different from other girls your age, he told me one evening as we walked through the park downtown. You have substance. You think about real things. I wanted to tell him about my mother, about the years of psychological warfare that had forced me to grow up faster than most people my age. But talking about her felt like inviting poison into something pure and beautiful. So I kept Marcus as far away from my family as possible. When he suggested meeting my parents, I made excuses. They're really busy with work, or they're not much for social situations, or I want to keep this just between us for a while. Marcus was patient, but I could tell he was starting to wonder if I was ashamed of him, or if there was something wrong with my family situation. After 4 months together, he gently pressed the issue. Sophia, if we're going to get serious, and I hope we are, I need to meet the people who matter to you. I understand wanting to take things slow, but at some point, hiding our relationship starts to feel like you don't think it has a future. He was right, and I knew it. A man like Marcus wasn't going to settle for being someone's secret indefinitely. He wanted a real relationship with a real future, and that meant integrating our lives. My mother can be intense, I warned him. She has strong opinions about everything, and she doesn't always know when to keep them to herself. I can handle intense mothers, he laughed. I grew up with 4 sisters and a mother who never met an opinion she couldn't express loudly. I wanted to tell him that this was different, that my mother wasn't just opinionated, she was dangerous. But how do you explain to someone that your own mother sees you as competition? How do you warn the man you love that the woman who gave birth to you will try to steal him away? You can't. Not without sounding paranoid and crazy. So I agreed to bring him to Sunday dinner, knowing in my heart that I was about to lose the best thing that had ever happened to me. Sunday dinner was set for 6 o'clock. I arrived at 5:30, hoping to have a moment alone with my mother to establish some ground rules. Instead, I found her emerging from her bedroom looking like she'd spent the entire day preparing for a movie premiere. She was wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her makeup was professionally applied. She'd obviously gone to a salon that morning. Her hair was styled in soft waves that took years off her appearance, and she was wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. Don't you think that's a little much for a family dinner? I asked, though my heart was already sinking. I want to make a good impression on the man who might become my son-in-law, she said sweetly. But there was something predatory in her smile that made my skin crawl. When Marcus arrived with flowers, roses for me and a smaller bouquet for my mother, I watched her face light up like she was the one being courted. How thoughtful, she exclaimed, taking the flowers and inhaling their scent in a way that was somehow sensual. Sophia, you didn't tell me you were dating such a gentleman. During cocktails, she positioned herself strategically on the couch so that Marcus had to sit either next to her or directly across from her. She chose topics designed to showcase her intelligence and sophistication. Current events, wine, travel. Every time she spoke, she touched his arm or shoulder. Just brief contact that could be explained as natural gesturing. You know, I feel more like Sophia's sister than her mother, she said at one point, laughing in a way that made her chest rise and fall noticeably. People always think we're siblings when we're out together. Marcus was being polite, but I could see him becoming increasingly uncomfortable with her behavior. When she got up to refill drinks, he leaned over to me. "Is your mother always this touchy?" he whispered. "I tried to warn you," I said miserably. But dinner was where she really went to work. She'd made his favorite meal. Somehow she'd found out he loved osso buco, something I'd never even mentioned to her. She kept his wine glass filled and asked him detailed questions about his work, his background, his family. "A financial advisor," she mused, leaning forward so her necklace caught the light. "That must require such intelligence and intuition. I've always been attracted to men who really understand money and power." The word attracted hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus shifted uncomfortably and reached for my hand under the table. "Sophia's planning to be a psychologist," he said, clearly trying to redirect the conversation to me. "Oh, yes," my mother said dismissively. "She's always been fascinated by broken people and their problems. I suppose everyone needs a hobby." The way she diminished my career aspirations while simultaneously presenting herself as more interesting and sophisticated made my blood boil. But I kept quiet, hoping the evening would end soon. After Marcus left, I confronted her. "What was that performance about?" "Performance?" she asked innocently. "I was being hospitable to my daughter's boyfriend. You were flirting with him, blatantly. Don't be ridiculous. Just because you're insecure doesn't mean every conversation is flirtation." But over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. Marcus would mention conversations he'd had with my mother that I knew nothing about. She was texting him, somehow she'd gotten his number, asking for advice about investments and insurance. "Your mom is really something," he said one afternoon after spending 20 minutes on the phone with her. "She's so youthful for her age, and she's been through a lot as a single mother." Single mother. She'd been married to my father for 18 years, and they'd only divorced 2 years ago. But somehow she'd rewritten history to make herself seem like a brave woman who'd raised a child alone. "She's not that young," I said. "She's 45. "Really?" "She doesn't look it. Or act it, honestly. She has this vitality that most women her age lose." Every compliment he gave her felt like a dagger in my heart. I watched the man I loved falling under the same spell that had captivated every other man in her orbit. The end came 3 weeks later. I went to Marcus's apartment planning to surprise him with dinner. I had a key, so I let myself in quietly, planning to start cooking before he got home from work. Instead, I found my mother's purse on his kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I stared at that purse. Part of me wanted to leave, to pretend I'd never seen it, to live in denial for just a little longer. But I couldn't move. I heard voices coming from the bedroom. My mother's laugh, that same musical sound she used when she was performing for male attention. Then Marcus's voice, lower, saying something I couldn't make out. I should have left. I should have walked out that door and never looked back. Instead, I crept closer to the bedroom, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. The door was slightly open, and what I saw destroyed me completely. My mother was wearing lingerie I'd never seen before, black lace that made her look like she was posing for a magazine. She was draped across Marcus's bed like she owned it, like she belonged there. And Marcus was looking at her the way he used to look at me, with desire and admiration and something that looked like love. "You make me feel like I'm 25 again," she was saying, tracing patterns on his chest. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted by a real man. "You're incredible," Marcus replied, stroking her hair. "I can't believe you wasted so many years with someone who didn't appreciate you." She was talking about my father, rewriting their marriage as some tragic story where she was the victim instead of the woman who had cheated on him repeatedly. And Marcus was buying every word. "What about Sophia?" he asked, and for a moment my heart leaped, thinking he was going to come to his senses. "Sophia is a child," my mother said dismissively. "She doesn't understand adult relationships or real passion. What we have is so much deeper than what you had with her. This is real love, not some college infatuation." "You're right," Marcus said, pulling her closer. "I thought I loved her, but this is something completely different." I backed away from the door silently, grabbed my mother's purse and dumped it on Marcus's kitchen table. Her phone was inside and it wasn't password protected. The text messages between them went back 3 weeks, exactly to the day after our family dinner. She'd started by asking for financial advice, then moved to more personal topics. Within days, she was sending him photos of herself in workout clothes, at the spa, in evening gowns. She'd told him about her lonely marriage and her difficult divorce. She'd painted herself as a sophisticated woman trapped by circumstances, finally free to explore real connection with a man who deserved her. Marcus had responded exactly as she knew he would. She'd studied him during that dinner, identified his weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. He was a successful man who'd always been attracted to older, sophisticated women. She'd presented herself as exactly what he'd been looking for his whole life. The most recent messages were from that morning. She'd told him she was ready to take this to the next level, and he'd responded that he was falling in love with her in a way he'd never experienced before. I took photos of everything with my own phone, put her purse back exactly where I'd found it, and left. That night, I waited for Marcus to call me with some excuse about why he couldn't see me. Instead, he showed up at my apartment looking guilty and nervous. "We need to talk," he said, and I knew exactly what was coming. "Let me guess," I said calmly. "You're ending things with me because you've fallen in love with my mother." His face went white. "How did you?" "I went to surprise you with dinner. Saw her purse on your counter. Read the text messages." He had the decency to look ashamed, but not ashamed enough to take it back. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. But what your mother and I have, it's something I've never felt before. She understands me in ways that—" "Stop," I said quietly. "Just stop talking. I hope someday you can understand," I said. "Get out of my apartment and out of my life." After he left, I sat alone in my living room and finally understood the true depth of my mother's cruelty. Derek had been practice. Marcus was the real target, the man she knew I truly loved, the relationship she knew would destroy me to lose. She hadn't just stolen my boyfriend. She'd stolen my faith in love itself. I waited 3 days before confronting her. 3 days to let the rage build to a point where I could unleash every truth I'd been holding back for years. 3 days to plan exactly what I was going to say to the woman who had systematically destroyed every chance I'd had at happiness. I found her in her bedroom, trying on yet another outfit that belonged on someone half her age. She was humming to herself, practically glowing with satisfaction. When she saw me in her doorway, she smiled like nothing had happened. "Oh, good. You're here. I was hoping we could talk about Marcus." "Yes," I said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me. "Let's talk about Marcus." Something in my tone made her pause. She turned to face me fully, and I saw the exact moment she realized I knew everything. "Sophia, I can explain." "Explain what? How you seduced my boyfriend 3 weeks after meeting him? How you lied about your marriage to make yourself seem like a victim? How you've spent my entire life sabotaging every relationship I've ever had because you can't stand the thought of me being happy?" Her mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the cold calculation underneath. Then she rearranged her features into an expression of hurt innocence. "Sweetheart, you're overreacting. Marcus and I connected on an adult level that you simply wouldn't understand. You're still so young." "I'm young?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm 21 years old. You're a 45-year-old woman stealing boyfriends from your own daughter. Who's acting young here? I didn't steal anything. Marcus made his own choice about what he wanted. After you manipulated him with lies and sob stories and photos of yourself in lingerie. I saw the text messages, Mother. I know exactly how you connected with him." For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear flash across her face. She hadn't expected me to have evidence. "You went through my phone?" "I went through your phone that was sitting in his apartment while you were screwing my boyfriend in his bed." She flinched at my language. "But I was just getting started. Do you want to know what the worst part is? It's not even that you took Marcus from me. It's that you've been doing this my entire life, and I was too stupid to see it. Every boy who never called back, every invitation to parties I never received, every time I felt invisible and worthless, that was you. You've been destroying my self-esteem since I was 15 because you couldn't handle your own daughter getting attention. That's not true." "It's completely true," I screamed. "You're a pathetic, desperate woman who peaked in high school and never got over it. You're so terrified of aging that you compete with your own child for male attention. Do you have any idea how sick that is?" Now she was getting angry too, dropping the innocent act entirely. "You have no idea what it's like to watch your youth slip away," she snapped. "To feel invisible when you used to be the most beautiful woman in every room. You're 21. You have no concept of what I'm going through. So you decided to make sure I'd go through it too? You couldn't stand watching me experience the attention and love you think you're losing, so you've spent years making sure I never got to enjoy it. Men prefer mature women anyway. They want sophistication and experience, not some naive college girl who doesn't know anything about the world. Marcus preferred me until you lied to him about everything. You told him you were a single mother who'd been victimized by my father. You rewrote history to make yourself seem younger and more sympathetic. That's not sophistication. That's fraud. She crossed her arms defensively. I told him the truth about how I felt. Your father never appreciated me. And yes, I did raise you mostly alone while he worked all the time. You cheated on Dad repeatedly. He worked extra hours to afford your shopping addiction and your constant need for attention. And you raised me? You spent my entire childhood competing with me instead of protecting me. I protected you from making mistakes. You protected your own ego. You couldn't stand that men were looking at me instead of you. So you made sure I never got the chance to be happy with any of them. The facade was completely gone now. Her face was twisted with rage and something that looked like hatred. Fine, she said coldly. You want the truth? Yes, I took Marcus from you, and Derek before him, and I intercepted those phone calls in high school. And you know what? I'd do it all again. The admission hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known it was true. You're a monster, I whispered. I'm a woman who refuses to disappear just because her daughter thinks it's her turn to be the star. You think you deserve love more than I do just because you're younger? Life doesn't work that way. You're my mother. You're supposed to want me to be happy. And you're supposed to respect your elders and know your place. We stared at each other across the room, and I realized that this woman had never loved me. Not really. I had always been competition to her, never a daughter. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. All the pretense was gone. All the motherly concern and protective instincts she'd claimed to have for 21 years, revealed as elaborate lies. We stood there looking at each other with complete honesty for the first time in my life. You know what the saddest part is? I said finally, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. I spent my whole life trying to understand why you didn't love me the way other mothers loved their daughters. I thought there was something wrong with me. Sophia, let me finish. I used to watch my friends with their moms and wonder what I was doing wrong. Why didn't you want to braid my hair or take pictures with me? Why did you seem annoyed when I accomplished something? Why did you always find fault with everything I did? She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. Now I know. It wasn't that you didn't love me. It's that you saw me as a threat from the moment I stopped being a child. The second I became a potential rival for male attention, you stopped being my mother and became my competitor. That's not how I saw it. That's exactly how you saw it. And the truly sick part is that you were competing with a teenager. Your own teenage daughter. What kind of woman does that? The words were pouring out of me now. 21 years of confusion and hurt finally making sense. A real mother protects her daughter. She builds her up, helps her navigate relationships, teaches her to value herself. A real mother wants her daughter to be confident and happy and loved. I took a shaky breath. You did the opposite of all of that. I was trying to protect you from making mistakes. No, you were protecting yourself from being replaced. Every boy I talked to, every compliment I received, every moment when I felt pretty or special, you saw it as something being taken away from you, instead of something beautiful happening to your child. She was crying now too, but I felt no sympathy for her tears. You want to know what your protection taught me? It taught me that I wasn't worth loving. It taught me that any man who showed interest in me was probably lying or confused. It taught me to doubt every compliment and question every kind gesture because my own mother had shown me that women lie and manipulate to get what they want. I never meant... You absolutely meant it. Every sabotaged relationship, every undermined confidence, every moment you made me feel small and worthless. You meant all of it. Because in your twisted mind, keeping me insecure meant keeping yourself relevant. I wiped my eyes and looked at her with complete clarity. But here's what you never understood. You didn't need to tear me down to build yourself up. You could have been a beautiful, confident woman and a loving mother. You could have taught me to be strong while showing me how to be graceful. You could have been an example of how to age with dignity instead of desperately clinging to youth by destroying your own daughter's chances at happiness. Sophia, please. Instead, you chose to be pathetic. You chose to be the kind of woman who seduces her daughter's boyfriends and calls it sophistication. You chose to be someone who steals from a child rather than building your own life. I walked to her closet and pulled out a suitcase. What are you doing? I'm leaving? Tonight? And I'm never coming back? You can't just leave. This is your home. This was never my home. Home is where you're loved and protected and valued. This is just a house where I happen to live with a woman who spent 21 years trying to destroy my self-worth. I started throwing clothes into the suitcase, not caring what I grabbed. You're being dramatic. Where will you go? How will you support yourself? I'll figure it out. Anything is better than staying here and pretending we have a normal mother-daughter relationship when what we actually have is toxic and abusive. Abusive? I never laid a hand on you. Emotional abuse is still abuse. Psychological manipulation is still abuse. Sabotaging your child's relationships and self-esteem is still abuse, even if you never hit me. She was sobbing now, reaching for me as I packed. Sophia, please don't do this. We can work through this. I can change. I stopped packing and looked at her with something that might have been pity. You can't change because you don't think you did anything wrong. Even now, you're not apologizing for what you did to Marcus or Derek or all those boys in high school. You're just upset that I found out about it. That's not true. It is true. And that's how I know this will never end. As long as I'm in your life, you'll keep seeing me as competition instead of your daughter. You'll keep trying to take things away from me because you can't stand the thought of me having something you want. I zipped up the suitcase and headed for the door. So this is it? She called after me. You're just going to walk away from your family? I turned back to look at her one last time. You stopped being my family the day you decided I was your enemy instead of your daughter. You stopped being my mother the moment you chose to hurt me rather than protect me. I am your mother. Nothing can change that. Biology doesn't make you a mother. Love makes you a mother. Protection makes you a mother. Sacrifice makes you a mother. I picked up my suitcase. You're just a woman who gave birth to me and then spent the next 21 years trying to destroy me. Sophia, goodbye. Don't contact me. Don't try to find me. Don't show up at my school or my work. We're done. And I walked out of that house knowing I would never set foot in it again. The first year of independence was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I moved into a tiny studio apartment 40 minutes from campus, the only place I could afford on what I made from my part-time job at the campus bookstore. I had to take out additional student loans to cover rent and living expenses, knowing I'd be paying them off for decades. Some nights I survived on ramen noodles and sheer determination. I worked at the bookstore during the day, waited tables at a restaurant near campus 3 nights a week, and still managed to maintain my grades in my psychology program. There were moments when I was so exhausted I could barely think straight, but I never once considered going back to her. The freedom was intoxicating, even when it came with financial stress. For the first time in my life, I could make decisions without worrying about how they would affect my mother's need for attention. I could wear whatever I wanted, talk to whoever interested me, and go out without having to navigate her subtle sabotage. But the emotional work was harder than the physical challenges. 21 years of psychological manipulation doesn't disappear overnight. I found myself second-guessing every compliment, analyzing every male interaction for signs of deception, and struggling to trust my own judgment about people and relationships. 6 months after leaving home, I finally gathered the courage to start therapy. Dr. Patricia Williams was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. The first time I tried to explain my relationship with my mother, I kept minimizing what had happened. She wasn't physically abusive, I kept saying. She never hit me or anything like that. Sophia, Dr. Williams said gently, emotional abuse is real abuse. What you're describing, the systematic undermining of your self-esteem, the sabotage of your relationships, the competition for male attention, those are classic patterns of narcissistic parenting. Hearing it labeled that way was both validating and devastating. Validating because it meant I wasn't crazy or overly sensitive. Devastating because it meant acknowledging that my mother had never really loved me the way I'd always hoped she would. Narcissistic parents see their children as extensions of themselves rather than separate individuals with their own needs and rights. Dr. Williams explained. When you started receiving attention that she felt belonged to her, you became a threat to her sense of self-worth. Therapy helped me understand that nothing I could have done would have changed our dynamic. My mother's behavior wasn't about my inadequacy. It was about her own deep insecurities and inability to see me as anything other than competition. Slowly, I began to rebuild my sense of self-worth. I started setting boundaries with people, recognizing manipulation tactics, and trusting my own instincts. I learned to accept compliments without automatically looking for hidden agendas. I discovered what it felt like to have friendships that weren't tainted by constant comparison or competition. My junior and senior years of college were transformative. Without my mother's constant undermining, I flourished academically and socially. I made friends who genuinely cared about me, dated men who treated me with respect, and discovered talents and interests I'd never been allowed to explore. I graduated summa cum laude with my bachelor's degree in psychology and was accepted into a master's program in clinical psychology. For the first time in my life, I felt proud of my accomplishments without waiting for someone to tear them down. The healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking that maybe I'd been too harsh, that maybe my mother really had been trying to protect me in her own twisted way. But then I'd remember Marcus, remember Derek, remember all those intercepted phone calls and sabotaged opportunities, and I'd know I'd made the right choice. 2 years after leaving home, I was living in a decent apartment, had a paid internship at a counseling center, and was dating a kind man named David, who treated me like I was valuable and worthy of love. The contrast between my life with my mother and my life without her was stark. Without her constant criticism and competition, I discovered that I was actually a confident, capable person. I was good at making friends, successful in school, and attractive to quality men who respected me. All those years of feeling inadequate and unworthy had been artificial, the result of her systematic efforts to keep me insecure. But my mother wasn't done with me yet. Even though I'd cut off all contact, she found ways to try to maintain control. She showed up at my graduation ceremony uninvited, making a scene when security escorted her out. She called my workplace multiple times, trying to convince my supervisors that I was mentally unstable and needed help. Each attempt at contact only reinforced my decision to stay away from her. The woman who claimed to love me was actively trying to sabotage my career and education. A real mother would have been proud of my achievements and respected my boundaries. The final confirmation that I'd made the right choice came when I ran into my high school friend Sarah at a coffee shop. We'd lost touch after graduation, but she recognized me immediately. "Sophia, how are you? I haven't seen you since we graduated." We spent an hour catching up, and eventually the conversation turned to family. "How's your mom?" Sarah asked. She was always so glamorous and young-looking. "We don't speak anymore," I said simply. Sarah's expression changed. "Oh, I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't say this. But she tried to friend me on social media last year. Then she started messaging me, asking about my boyfriend and if I ever came home to visit. It was really weird." My blood ran cold. "What kind of messages?" She kept asking if my boyfriend was serious about me, and if I thought older women were more attractive than girls our age. She sent me some selfies that were really inappropriate, like bikini photos and stuff. I finally had to block her because it was making me uncomfortable. Even 2 years after cutting contact, my mother was still trying to compete with women my age, including my former friends. The revelation made me feel sick, but it also made me grateful that I'd escaped when I did. By the time I finished my master's degree, I had built a life that was completely separate from my mother's influence. I was working as a counselor myself, helping other people navigate difficult family relationships and recover from emotional abuse. In many ways, my own experience had made me a better therapist. I had found peace, but I wasn't prepared for the day when our paths would cross again. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing case files at the counseling center. My father's voice was strained when I answered. "Sophia, I have some bad news. Your grandfather passed away yesterday evening." Grandpa Joe had been my father's father, and the only family member who had ever truly understood me. Even during my childhood, he'd been the one adult who seemed to see through my mother's performances and recognize the damage she was doing. "The funeral is this Saturday," my father continued. "I know you and your mother. I know things are complicated, but Joe loved you very much, and I think he'd want you there." I hadn't seen or spoken to anyone from my family in 5 years. The thought of being in the same room as my mother made my stomach churn, but I couldn't miss my grandfather's funeral. He'd been one of the few bright spots in my childhood. "I'll be there," I told my father. "But I want you to know that I'm coming for Grandpa Joe, not to reconcile with her." "I understand. And Sophia, I'm proud of who you've become. I know your grandfather would be proud too." Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, fitting weather for a funeral. I chose my outfit carefully, a conservative black dress that was professional and dignified. I wanted to look like the successful, confident woman I'd become, not the insecure girl my mother remembered. When I walked into the funeral home, I saw her immediately. She was holding court near the casket, surrounded by relatives and family friends who were offering condolences. At 50, she was still beautiful, but there was something desperate about her appearance that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Her black dress was too tight and too short for a funeral. Her makeup was heavy and her hair was styled in a way that belonged on someone decades younger. She looked like she was trying to compete for attention even at her own father-in-law's funeral. I signed the guest book and made my way toward my father, who was standing quietly in a corner talking to my uncle. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine warmth. "Sophia, you look wonderful." "Thank you for calling me," I said, hugging him. "How are you holding up?" "It's been hard." He was ready to go, but that doesn't make it easier. We talked quietly about my grandfather's final days and the arrangements for the service. I was grateful to have this connection with my father, who had always been caught in the middle of my mother's manipulations. Eventually, I made my way to the casket to pay my respects. My grandfather looked peaceful, and I found myself smiling as I remembered his terrible jokes and the way he used to sneak me extra cookies when my mother wasn't looking. "He loved you very much," a voice said behind me. I turned to see my mother approaching, her eyes red from crying. Up close, the years showed more clearly. Her face was tight in places that suggested cosmetic procedures, and there were lines around her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. "He was a good man," I replied coolly, turning back to the casket. "Sophia, we need to talk." "No, we don't. Please, it's been 5 years. I've missed you so much." I finally looked at her directly. "Have you? Or have you missed having someone to compete with?" Her face crumpled. "That's not fair. I know I made mistakes, but I've changed. I've been going to therapy, working on myself. I realize now that I was wrong about so many things." "Good for you. Don't you think we could try to rebuild our relationship? Life is short, and family is important." I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or self-awareness. What I saw instead was the same manipulative calculation I'd always seen, just packaged differently. "Have you apologized to Marcus for lying to him?" I asked. She looked confused. "What does Marcus have to do with anything? That was years ago. Have you apologized to any of the men you manipulated over the years? Have you taken responsibility for the damage you did to my self-esteem and my ability to trust people?" "I was protecting you." "There it is," I said quietly. 5 years of therapy, and you still can't admit what you really did. You're still telling yourself the same lies. "I'm trying to make amends." You're trying to make yourself feel better about your choices, but you're not actually taking responsibility for them. Real change would mean acknowledging that you sabotaged my relationships because you were jealous, not because you were protecting me. Several family members were starting to look in our direction, drawn by the tension in our conversation. "I think it's time for me to go," I said loudly enough for others to hear. "Thank you for letting me know about the funeral, Dad." My mother reached for my arm as I turned to leave. "Sophia, please don't do this. Don't walk away again." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. In a voice that carried clearly to the relatives who were watching, I said, "We don't have that kind of relationship anymore. Please don't touch me." I pulled away and walked to my car, leaving her standing in the parking lot with tears streaming down her face and half the family watching. As I drove away, I felt no satisfaction in her tears, but I also felt no regret. She'd had 5 years to do real work on herself, to take genuine responsibility for her actions, to become the kind of person who could have a healthy relationship with her daughter. Instead, she'd spent those years learning to package her manipulation in more sophisticated language, while continuing the same destructive patterns that had driven me away in the first place. Some people never change, and some relationships are too damaged to repair, no matter how much time passes. 10 years have passed since I walked out of my mother's house, and I can honestly say I've never been happier. Today, as I write this, I'm sitting in the sunroom of the home I share with my husband, James, watching our 3-year-old daughter Emma play in the backyard with our golden retriever. James and I met 4 years ago at a conference for mental health professionals. He's a psychiatrist who specializes in family trauma, and he understood my history better than anyone I'd ever dated. When I told him about my mother, he didn't try to convince me that family is family, or that I should give her another chance. He simply listened, understood, and respected the boundaries I'd set. "You protected yourself," he said, after I'd shared the whole story. "That takes incredible strength and wisdom, especially when you were so young." Our wedding was small and beautiful, exactly what we wanted. My father walked me down the aisle, and several cousins and extended family members attended. There was a moment when I wondered if my mother would try to crash the ceremony, but she didn't. Later, I learned from my cousin Lisa that she'd been devastated not to be invited, but she'd finally accepted that her actions had consequences. Becoming a mother myself has given me a completely new perspective on my relationship with my biological mother. Every day, I'm amazed by the fierce protectiveness I feel toward Emma. The idea of competing with her for anything, let alone romantic attention, is so foreign to me that it's hard to believe my mother ever thought it was acceptable. When Emma smiles, I want to celebrate her joy. When she accomplishes something new, I feel proud and excited for her future. When she's upset, every instinct I have is focused on comforting and protecting her. This is what maternal love is supposed to feel like. Not competition, not resentment, not the need to diminish your child to elevate yourself. Real motherhood means wanting your child to surpass you, to be happier and more successful than you ever were. My mother never experienced that feeling, and I genuinely feel sorry for her because of it. She missed out on one of the most beautiful relationships a person can have because she was too damaged by her own insecurities to love me properly. My mother made attempts to contact me over the years. She sent a card when Emma was born, which I threw away without opening. She tried to friend me on social media multiple times, using different accounts. She even hired a private investigator to find my address, resulting in a restraining order when she started showing up at my office. Each attempt at contact only reinforced my decision. A person who respected boundaries and had genuinely changed would have accepted my choice and left me alone. Someone who continues to stalk and harass their adult child after being explicitly told not to contact them is still the same manipulative person they always were. Last year, my father called to tell me that my mother had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. He wasn't asking me to reconcile with her, just letting me know in case I wanted to process the information with my therapist. I felt sad for her, but not guilty about my decision to stay away. Disease doesn't erase the choices someone made when they were healthy. It doesn't magically transform an abusive parent into someone safe to be around. I've made peace with the fact that my mother will likely die without us reconciling, and that some family members will always think I'm cold or unforgiving because of it. What matters to me is that I've built a life filled with genuine love, mutual respect, and healthy relationships. Emma will grow up knowing that her parents adore her, support her dreams, and see her success as a source of joy rather than threat. She'll never have to wonder if the people who claim to love her are actually working against her happiness. That's the greatest gift I can give her, the security and confidence that comes from being truly loved and protected. Some wounds are indeed too deep to heal, and some relationships are too toxic to salvage. Recognizing when to walk away from people who hurt you, even family members, isn't giving up on love. It's choosing to love yourself enough to demand better. True motherhood, I've learned, isn't biological. It's emotional, protective, and sacrificial in all the right ways. My biological mother failed completely in that role, but I've surrounded myself with people who know how to love properly. And now, as I watch Emma chase butterflies in our garden while James reads on the porch nearby, I can honestly say I've found the peace and happiness I was always meant to have. Sometimes the family you create is more powerful than the family you were born into. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to say goodbye.